This is a 2013 13-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display, specifically my 2013 MacBook Pro with Retina display, hence all the stickers that came free with tech products. Also, the Helios sticker my friend got me for Christmas. Sorry about that. But as I said, this is my MacBook Pro, and I initially wanted to do this review at the start of the year. However, after using pretty much only my iMac for a year and a half prior, it had been a while since I'd actually used one, so over the past 4 months or so, I've been making a conscious effort to use this thing thoroughly and really get to know the experience again. So therefore today we're going to be talking about whether or not it might actually be worth buying an older original design MacBook Pro with Retina display in 2020, or whether you shouldn't go older than the 2016 model. Let's find out. Okay, so first of all, as usual, we're going to be going over the specs. In terms of specs, this is a late 2013 MacBook Pro with Retina display with the 2.4 GHz i5, 16 GB of DDR3 RAM, and a 256 GB SSD. So in terms of specs, very mid-range. Because this is the 13-inch model, this model features Intel Iris graphics with 1.5 GB of VRAM, which are very unimpressive for 2020. In terms of battery, this model features a 71.8 watt-hour lithium-ion battery, and we're going to be talking more about how that battery works later on, as well as the traditional backlit chiclet keyboard. And finally, this 13-inch model I have here weighs in at 1.57 kilograms. And as for the key specs, other than the screen, which does get a full dedicated section later on, that's pretty much it. We are going to be talking about how well this laptop performs soon, but it's safe to say that purely based on the spec list, this is a pretty old machine now. Following on, we have the design, and in my opinion, this laptop is still, to this day, one of the best designed laptops ever. The slim form factor combined with the premium feeling aluminium build and glossy screen, with little touches such as the one-hand opening and backlit keyboard, make this a great looking, great feeling laptop. It can be a little heavy at times, especially when it's in my camera bag with the rest of my camera gear, which it sometimes is, especially if I go somewhere to take photos. It can feel a little heavy. That said, I actually think the slightly heavier weight does make it feel a little bit more premium. In terms of the physical build quality, I have actually dented an aluminium MacBook before, which really isn't all that good, but these rarely affect the performance of the machine in my experience, and all in all, the premium build and slick design still make this, at least in my opinion, one of the best designed laptops ever. Okay, so next up, we're going to be taking a look at probably one of the biggest features on release, the Retina display screen. It's got a resolution of 2560 by 1600, a PPI of 227, a brightness of around 330 nits, and still, this thing looks awesome. In bright situations, it can occasionally be a little bit difficult to see. For reference, my 2017 iMac behind me, that has a brightness of 500 nits, and the difference can be noticeable in bright situations. That said, 99% of the time, I've honestly had no problems. I've used the screen for everything from photo and video editing to simple media consumption, and I've never felt limited by either the color accuracy or the clarity of the screen. That said, sometimes when I'm editing on this thing, it can occasionally feel a little small, especially with all the other elements on the screen, so if you're coming from a larger screen, there may be an adjustment period. Overall, in 2020, I do still think this screen is really good, especially for a 13-inch laptop of this age, and all in all, I have very few complaints here. After this, we got the trackpad. As I said, this is the classic pre-2015 trackpad, so there's no force touch, you simply get the traditional mechanical touchpad. And this trackpad, in my opinion at least, feels great. It's nice and tactile, a good size, although not as big as the new ones, and still feels precise all these years later. If you never used a MacBook before, it can take some getting used to, seeing as it's all one piece. There's no separate 2 buttons like there is on a lot of gaming laptops, but this really doesn't take all that long to get used to. And once you do, it's a really good quality trackpad. Of course, as I said before, if you choose a MacBook this old, you are giving up those force touch actions that are available on 2015 MacBooks or newer. But still, personally, I don't think this is all that important, and the savings you can make are pretty significant. So yeah, very few complaints here. In terms of the keyboard, I'm gonna be honest, this generation of MacBook Pros probably have my favorite keyboard ever. It's a simple backlit chiclet keyboard that is a little worn at this point, but it's nice and tactile, and as someone who really enjoys keyboards, I rarely find myself wanting, well, no, needing a better keyboard. Yeah. That's probably a better way of putting it. In my time using this MacBook, there have been no reliability issues surrounding the keyboard. Nothing's got stuck or come loose. It's just worked. And that's something I think Apple got very right with this generation of MacBooks. Aside from some GPU issues on, like, I think the 2012 15-inch model. But yeah, mostly, this generation of MacBooks was without issue. Also, because this is a pre-2016 MacBook Pro, the model I have here does have a healthy selection of ports. This particular 13-inch model actually features 2 USB 3.0 3.0 ports, aka the traditional USB Type A port, which honestly is a pretty big deal for me, and I'll explain why in a minute. It also features an SD card reader, which I love, 2 Thunderbolt 2 ports, an HDMI port, and an audio jack. So a pretty good selection, meaning I don't have to carry around an adapter. Now, I know at this point adapters are pretty much an accepted part of the MacBook experience, and for most people, that's probably fine. However, I have a pretty bad habit of losing stuff, and if I'm on the go, I need to get some editing done, go to reach for the adapter, it's not there. I can't do any editing, and this is a primarily on-the-go machine. Now, I know some people have come up with some very creative solutions. Josh Yo's Velcro solution comes to mind, but still, the less stuff I have to lose, the better. And as I said, seeing as I use this on the go so much, it'd be kind of difficult for me to find a permanent place for an adapter, meaning, of course, all the more chance that it would just vanish. It would go. All in all, there's a healthy selection of ports, and as I said, I find this incredibly useful. Up next, we're getting to probably the most important part, the performance. Now, I think it's important that I actually talk about what I've actually used this laptop for. I've used it for video editing in Final Cut and Premiere, music production with Logic, graphics and animation with After Effects, and photo editing with Photoshop and Lightroom. If you watched my initial video, then you may have seen that one of the tools I planned to use was Xcode. However, in the end, I didn't end up using it. I actually used Visual Studio and C#. So yeah, haven't really used Xcode on this machine. In terms of video editing performance, considering its age and specs, it's overall been pretty good. Overall, in Final Cut, timeline performance was pretty smooth with minimal lagging on HD footage, and even 4K once the timeline had rendered out. Granted, it did get significantly slower once a set of effects and titles were thrown on, occasionally getting very choppy, but all in all, the editing experience in Final Cut was pretty good. That is, until we get to rendering. For some reason, encoding a 10-minute video would take like 30 to 35 minutes on this thing, which is very unusual for Final Cut. I've had 13-inch MacBooks before, and I don't remember it being this slow to render. Granted, in my time editing in Final Cut, I have mostly been using 15-inch MacBooks, along with, of course, this iMac, so maybe I've been spoiled, and I personally don't really think rendering time is all that important anyway. I would much rather have smooth timeline performance and a long render time rather than vice versa. So yeah, all in all, performance in Final Cut was pretty good. Moving on to Premiere, we had kind of a weird result. Typically, Premiere is known to perform a little bit worse and to be significantly less forgiving on slower, less powerful machines. But for some reason, performance was significantly better on Premiere. For 1080p footage, performance was stellar. Very few frame drops until the effects started to get heavy, and rendering actually took noticeably less time than Final Cut, which I think is awesome. So yeah, as it would turn out, video editing is possible on a 2013 MacBook Pro. That is, if you set up your computer right and shoot in an edit-friendly codec, it should be possible, albeit with like a few issues. After this, we got music production and audio editing both in Logic. And yeah, honestly, this was pretty flawless. Samples loaded quickly, they can be played back in real time, and it would only occasionally lag. So yeah, if that's all you want to do with this computer, then you should have very few issues. Moving on to graphics and animation, again, pretty good here too. Drawing graphics was pretty much seamless, and while I did have to render my animations before I could smoothly watch them, this really wasn't an issue for me. Exporting, however, did take significantly longer than it would on my iMac though, but seeing as all my animations are like 20 seconds or less, that often triple render time really didn't bother me. And hey, I can just do something else while I'm waiting. Seriously, in my editing life, I've dealt with like 6-7 hour render times before, so my exports not being real time or faster really doesn't bother me. In terms of photo editing, this is probably my most used computer actually. I make most of the thumbnails for this channel in a combination of Lightroom and Photoshop, and it usually performs great. Loading photos is fast thanks to that SSD, and I only really experience slowdowns when I'm using that spot removal tool. This laptop has confidently allowed me to edit photos on the go, because while I do love editing on my phone, I do still think that full operating system based programs aren't going anywhere anytime soon. So for my photo editing needs, I found this MacBook to do just fine. So yeah, overall for a late 2013 device, I'd say that the performance has held up nicely. And while it's certainly not the fastest machine I've used, because the specs were quite decent on release with 16GB of RAM and an SSD, I found it to be at the very least usable and in a lot of cases, downright good. Moving on, we're now going to be talking about a less crucial part, the speakers. In comparison to the new 13-inch on which the speakers are pretty similar to the 15-inch speakers, which I've always enjoyed, this generation has down-firing speakers, but also don't sound terrible. I think the best internal speakers I've ever tried have been the ones on my iMac, closely followed by the speakers on the 15-inch MacBook Pro, and then after that, we got the 13-inch. Now, they are clear, but they're also a little bit tinny and lack detail, so as I say for phones, they're fine for some casual listening, but if you want to do anything more complex, then you probably should plug in either a nice pair of headphones or some speakers. Okay, so finally, we're talking battery life, and honestly, this is probably the weakest point of this laptop. My battery is currently in replace soon condition, and I get around 3.5 hours of battery life on on a full charge, which, to be honest, already isn't great, but that'll drain even faster if you're doing something performance heavy. This isn't too big of a deal because it can always be replaced, granted at some cost, but still, it's not the end of the MacBook if the battery does go bad. That said, battery condition should always be a key consideration when you're looking at a used MacBook. This is because when lithium-ion batteries get charged, the max capacity of this battery will gradually decrease, and seeing as this laptop is from late 2013, it's fair to say this is to be expected by now. So, your options are finding a replacement on eBay and then giving a crack at it yourself. That's probably what I'm going to end up doing. Let me know, by the way, if that's a video you want to see. Or you can pay Apple to do it for you. It's up to you, but regardless, it is worth checking out the battery health if you plan to buy a used MacBook. So, what do I think of this laptop, and should you buy one? In some ways, I absolutely love this laptop, and in others, I never want to use it again. But I guess that's just what comes with an older computer. I do love the 13-inch line of MacBooks. In fact, I started this channel with like a 13-inch MacBook and a Panasonic G7. In fact, specifically, this Panasonic G7. You can see I use this thing. It's all busted up. The viewfinder's gone. There certainly used to be a door here. So I do like the 13-inch line, and I think they're very capable laptops. However, I do think you need to quite carefully consider your needs if you're thinking of picking up a MacBook this old. First off, do you need a Mac? I bought mine because I needed the apps. Second of all, should you spend a little extra to get a lot more performance? Should you get a 15-inch? There's a lot of things you need to consider. And this one just so happens to fit my use case. A machine for some casual on-the-go editing of both photos and videos that can also be used in music production, and if that suits your use case too, also if you can deal with battery life and the performance drops when the editing gets heavy, then this might be a good choice. Alright guys, so that's it for today. As always, thank you for watching. Remember to like the video if you want to see more content like this, and smash that subscribe button. I'm done for now, and I will see you guys in the next one.